very fancy. I get music, I get animation. All right. Let me get started. My name is Joyce Lynn. I am in developer relations at Postman. I came all the way from San Francisco. I got 2 hours of sleep last night, so I'm a little bit jet lagged. Hopefully we'll get my energy up here. Who here has heard of Postman? Okay, almost 100%. Who here has used Postman? Okay, so I see at least 5 hands that are down, which is fantastic. Postman is an API platform used by over 25 million developers around the world. And some of this talk is going to involve Postman, but probably not in the way that you've used Postman before. So I'm going to be talking about some lesser used features. The title of this talk is Reverse Engineering a Web API. And I'm talking about a private API, one that is not yours, one that you do not produce. We'll talk about the what and the why with some examples. Tools and techniques for capturing network traffic, and then methods for replaying and testing APIs programmatically with code. And then we'll talk about a few high-level key takeaways. And this is going to be primarily for people that have never reverse engineered an API before, especially in Postman. So what is reverse engineering an API? The process by which a man-made object is deconstructed to reveal its designs and architecture or to extract knowledge from the object. Another word for this is back engineering, and yet another word used to describe reverse engineering is hacking. So this is Alyssa Knight. She calls herself a reformed API hacker, says all hacking is figuring out how something works. Okay? So security engineers and quality engineers are really good at this. They're naturally inclined to break something down to figure out how something works. But for the rest of us, why would you ever want to reverse engineer an API? So I have a couple examples here. Some people are looking for custom functionality. So this was an engineer that loved Starbucks. He wanted to make Slack integrations, coffee buttons, order Starbucks on command. But Starbucks didn't have a public API. They have a partner API, but not one where you could just sign up and play with their API. So a lot of companies don't have a public API, or they have one and it's really limited functionality. So engineers know what should be possible, and they get frustrated when the company doesn't enable that. So this story got posted on Hacker News, and it was trending. And so other people started sharing their reverse engineering stories, including this one. This person wanted extra bacon on their pizza order. So Papa John's is not in Croatia, but it's a popular pizza chain, and their web API behind the scenes limited the number of duplicate toppings, but not the duplicate underscore item property. So this engineer was able to order 50 bacons for free just knowing how the data was modeled. So Papa John's didn't have any server-side validation for the duplicate underscore item property, so it worked. Another example of an engineer who knew what could be done wanted a custom feature on UI. So this is couchsurfing.com. This engineer happened to live in the French Riviera and was getting inundated with requests for his couch. All he wanted was a calendar with availability together. A calendar and a filter, right? But the couchsurfing engineering team didn't have time. It wasn't a high priority. It was a very niche use case. So, they said, we're not going to be offering this via API, and in fact, can you please take down your site? Besides a custom UI, some developers are lazy, not us here, but some are lazy, and they want to automate tedious tasks. So if anybody's ever been on Tinder or a Tinder-like app, it's very tedious, it's very manual. And you can see there's 32 public repos with people trying to reverse engineer the Tinder API. Some people just don't want to sit there and drag their hand across the screen and pass. Other people are using computer vision. So that screenshot down there is computer vision interpreting whether or not they should like or pass. Or they're trying to bypass paywalls, right? So there's lots of selfish reasons for reverse engineering an API. I personally reversed one API once in my life. There's a famous park in the US called Yosemite where they have good camping spots and less good camping spots. And every month when they open up for reservations, within seconds, all the good spots are booked. How can that be? How can a human be clicking through and reserve those spots? It's all bots, right? So I reverse engineered something because I was selfish. Same thing with COVID vaccines. We have people trying to reserve COVID vaccines. I don't know if you guys do vaccinations here. Yeah, okay. Taylor Swift tickets, Beyonce tickets, sneakers. So there's lots of selfish reasons. And in fact, who here got to drive a Porsche? Right? So the organizers were super clear. You need to be precise with your entry at a certain time. And if somebody was enterprising, they could have reverse engineered, I believe it was an Airtable entry. I didn't do it. I didn't get to drive a Porsche. So lots of reasons to reverse engineer. If you're an API consumer and there's no public API or there's limited functionality, you're looking for that custom functionality. You're an engineer and you know what could be done. For API producers, you're mostly interested in debugging and testing. So you're performing quality or security audits, or you're working with legacy APIs that you inherited and they're undocumented or poorly documented. So for API consumers, there are some legal and ethical considerations. Okay, so when you're an API consumer, you need to check your terms of service. Do not violate your T's and C's. There's legal consequences. And in fact, that couch surfing example I shared with you earlier, couch surfing issued a cease and desist and said, please take down your application. Also, please take down that blog post explaining what you did. And then they changed their API. So this engineer kindly took down his application, but then he reverse engineered their second API and wrote a blog post about that one. Craigslist. Craigslist is another one that is known for suing a ton of people. Never try to reverse engineer Craigslist or use their data, because they've sued a number of companies and independent developers just for using and building on their data. So don't violate T's and C's. And in some cases, you could be committing a crime. Okay, so if you discover a security vulnerability, the general rule is that you want to give the organizations time to patch it, good faith time to patch it, right? And if you don't give them that time or they perceive it in bad faith, the software companies usually will go after you, and what they'll get you on is unauthorized access, which in the year is not a trivial, it's like, I looked it up just because I was curious, 10 years, right? If the FBI gets you for unauthorized access, that's 10 years. So you could be committing a crime. OWASP and EFF both have vulnerability disclosure guidelines that are pretty thorough about the common practices and what's accepted. And then just because something is legal, right, you're not committing a crime, you're not breaking any laws, does that mean it's ethical? So I wrote a blog post about the Yosemite thing, and I've talked about it before with people, but I don't know if it's ethical. And in fact, I'm very proud of doing it. It's not straightforward to reverse engineer something, but I also feel some shame. So it's not black and white, it's a gray area. And in fact, when I asked ChatGPT how to reverse engineer a private API, ChatGPT was very stubborn, refused to give me any information. There's a way around that, but this is what I got for a lot of it. So ask yourself if what you're doing is legal, but also ethical. So we talked about the what and why of reverse engineering. Next, let's look at tools and techniques for capturing network traffic. So I have a couple swag goodies here under the podium. What are the most common ways to sniff network calls? Just shout it out. I have bad hearing. Wireshark? DevTools, somewhere here. Oh, that was terrible. DevTools. I'm not going to get it. Okay, so let's start with DevTools. Okay, the most common way to inspect your network traffic. Okay, so here I'm on TikTok. I'm opening up my DevTools. I'm on Chrome here. Under the Network tab, if I right-click, I can copy. And in this case, I'm going to copy as curl and paste it into Postman. And Postman will parse out the request method, URL, headers, body. And I get a 200 OK. And I can inspect the body. Okay. So copying is curl, right? And in fact, there was a bunch of other data formats. DevTools gives us visibility into our network traffic, and fishing out just a single API request and pasting it in Postman, that's not hard. Now let's expand our view beyond a single request and take a look at an entire session, capturing an entire session of requests. So you can do that. You can right-click and copy as curl, copy the session as curl, but another commonly used format is a HAR file. So HTTP archive format, you can see it's JSON formatted there. HAR is used a lot for performance in analytics. So let's go back to our DevTools. Right-click again, and I'm going to save it as a HAR file. Okay, so I've saved my session, all the requests from the browsing in a session as a HAR file. And now I'm going to import it into Postman. And let's take a look at what we got. So I was only browsing for about 8 seconds, and TikTok sent a heck lot of requests there. Okay, so like if you're using a HAR file, you're going to be looking for optimization. You're going to be looking at across the board aggregate traffic, and this is a really good way to just like sum up what's happening in my session over 8 seconds, 50 some requests, right? Okay, so there's lots of options to export from DevTools and import into whatever your preferred API client is. So we looked at a single API request, we looked at an entire session, but what if I want to expand my view even more? Let's capture a real-time stream of API calls. And I'm talking about different sessions, multiple sessions coming in, multiple domains, and different devices. To do this, we can set up a web proxy, okay? So this is like a middleman that sits between your client app and your server to intercept HTTP traffic between a web browser and API server. And it says web browser here, but you can proxy traffic from any HTTP client application like mobile apps, desktop apps, IoT, and connected home apps. I hacked my Roomba just by listening to the traffic that was going out of my local network. And so to proxy our network calls, there's a bunch of free web proxy tools. So there's Postman, Minim Proxy, Fiddler, Burp, and a lot of these proxy tools are very popular among security engineers, but web devs may not be as familiar with it. So of course, I work at Postman. We're gonna be using Postman, and Postman has a few different proxies that you can use. We'll be using the Interceptor extension. Has anybody in the room used Interceptor? I saw 2, 3, somebody took a picture. I saw 2 hands. Wow, excellent, this is really exciting. Okay, so some people actually think that Postman is a browser extension. So this was one of the OG features that Postman had. So let's install Postman Interceptor to capture a stream of network calls. I'm gonna be working in Chrome, but you can use any of the major browsers. I'm in the Chrome Web Store. Okay, installing an extension, pinning it to my toolbar. And then when I open it up, I'm on Imager site, image hosting. So I can capture requests and I can capture cookies in my browser while I'm clicking around. So all I did was refresh the page, and you can already see the Imager sent off a couple behind the scenes network calls, and I have a couple other tabs open. So let me filter by the Imager domain. And so what some of you might be doing is opening up DevTools, looking at the network calls coming in as you're navigating around a certain tool, right? And so this is serving the same purpose, except what this is doing is piping those network calls into Postman so that we don't have to export as curl or export as a HAR file and then import. It's just a tunnel. Okay, so let's take a closer look at what we sent over to the Postman app. Okay, so now we're in the Postman desktop app. Here's where you can slice and dice, filter on method, domain. There's one odd Google domain in there because I think I didn't filter it soon enough. And what I'm going to do is save all those requests to a collection so I can share it with a teammate, I can replay it later, I could just reference all the activity that happened in that session. And I happen to organize it by domain and endpoint. Let's see if this one works. Okay, you got your request headers. Yeah, 200, okay. So out of the box, that one just worked. And in fact, I can inspect what some of these objects look like behind the scenes. Okay, so the interceptor, I said Postman has a couple different proxies. The interceptor is probably the most famous one, clearly famous, used by 2 people in this room, but it's just for browser traffic, right? But remember, there's other clients that you can sniff. I talked about my Roomba vacuum. There's desktop apps. You can see what VS Code is sending behind the scenes, what Slack's sending. So instead of interceptor, you can just use the standard Postman proxy for any client. And one of the most widely shared, one of the most famous ways that people reverse engineer, this was the case for Starbucks, Couchsurfing, and Tinder. All of them started by proxying their mobile traffic. Okay, this is a kind of a dense slide here, but now we have 2 devices, right? Before I had my machine, and I had the proxy running on my machine, and I had the browser, I was surfing Imager, just one machine, it's all the same. But now we have 2 devices. Now I have my client device, which is a phone, and the computer where Postman's running, so there's just 2 more steps. What I'm gonna do is configure my phone's Wi-Fi connection to point to the proxy, which is currently running on my machine here, so that the proxy is in the middle, and all the packets go through it on the way to and from the server that I'm trying to proxy traffic to. And I need to install a CA certificate on my device to capture HTTPS traffic. Okay, so you need to take 2 different steps. It's the exact same workflow, and it looks exactly the same in Postman, except you're using the proxy instead of the interceptor, and now you have a separate client device. Okay, so we looked at a single API request. We looked at an entire session, and we looked at a real-time stream of API requests where we can capture multiple sessions, multiple domains, and multiple devices. And if this is your API, meaning if you are the API producer, once you have a collection of your API calls, you can do a lot more, right? You can spin up mock servers so that you're not hitting actual web servers. You can generate documentation if you haven't done it already. And in fact, a lot of enterprise companies that have a ton of APIs that don't even know what they have running on their own infrastructure will set up a proxy to see what is running to document their endpoints. And then you can share it with your teammates, right? It's replayable. It's so easy. And then I hit the button, send, and I got a 200 okay, right? It's so easy to replay it. How many people here have tried to reverse engineer an API? Okay, so I see 20. How many, please raise your hand a little bit higher because the lights are really bright. Who has successfully reverse engineered an API? I see 2 hands. Oh, 3 hands. That's about right. It's not easy, and the replay is actually what's going to get a lot harder. Okay, so it's not as simple as just capturing it. Now begins the actual puzzle. Okay, so sometimes you have a timestamp, sometimes you have an access token, and the access token expires. You have custom-generated auth signatures, and those time out. Okay, there's server-side validation that's happening over here that you have no visibility in. So you're trying to figure out what are the hurdles so that I can appear like I am who I'm trying to appear like to the server. So what do you do next? Let's talk about just a couple scenarios, and there's infinite scenarios, okay? So you have cookie-based auth. Okay, so you have first-party cookies, third-party cookies that track you throughout your web session. And some websites like Postman is like this, Twitter is like this, GitHub.com, all of these sites are like this, where if you're cookied as a logged-in user, they'll serve up an entirely different experience for you. Okay, this is cookie-based auth. The user provides an authentication, right, the first time in the session. The server returns a cookie, and now the browser holds onto that cookie, and for every request to that domain, it's going to send it along. And this is going to happen like that until the user clears their cookies or the cookie expires. Okay, so if you're an API consumer, there's a couple ways you can handle cookie-based auth. So I'm going to hit github.com, and when I look at the preview, here's this beautiful page that gives me no information except prompts me to sign in, okay? It's going to look very different to the logged-in user, and under the response cookies, these are cookies that the GitHub server has returned to me. There's a couple. I'm not logged in, but these are a couple cookies that are being tracked. So I've opened the cookie manager at the bottom of Postman, and now I'm syncing cookies from github.com. I'm in a browser on this machine somewhere, logged into GitHub, not in Postman. But now when I send that call, I'm syncing cookies from my browser session to Postman, and holy cow, look at all those beautiful cookies, right? Lots and lots of cookies. So that happened a little fast, and if you've never worked with cookies in Postman before, let's just walk through a couple places where you can capture your cookies and put them in your cookie jar. Okay, so the first place is in the response under the cookies tab. All those beautiful cookies, you see your key value pairs. You can manually copy and paste this and include this in the next request, or you can write some code under the tests tab, write a test script to set a variable so you can reuse it whenever you want, right? Okay, so that's just in the response. You can see your cookies clear as day. And we didn't see this part, but there's the Postman console that if you don't know about the Postman console, like your life is about to get a lot easier, but you can see the raw network stuff that's being sent and received, right? And you can see 2 set cookie headers there, response headers, okay? And so again, once you have the cookie from the response, either from the console or from the cookies tab, you can either manually copy it and paste it and use it the next time you need it. You can write code to set a variable and reuse it later, or you can automatically sync through your browser. You can use any of the proxies, the interceptor or the standard proxy, to manage a cookie jar. Okay, so under the cookies cookie jar, now you have all of your cookies stored, and then you can delete them or clear them or reuse them later. Okay. So that's cookie auth. The next one is a little bit sticky, okay? What about client attributes? So sometimes the server is expecting you to be a browser. Sometimes it's expecting you to be a phone or a human, right? There's checks in place to make sure that you are all the things that you pretend to be. So let's take one example of dynamic websites. Okay, so on the top I have a screenshot of, I think it's LinkedIn. Yeah. LinkedIn. So a lot of people try to scrape LinkedIn data, but if you look at the response on the bottom, you can see a head but no body, right? Postman.com, I've personally tried to scrape Postman, and you can see a couple modules filtering in, but there's no data, not the data that I want to scrape. So these are both dynamically rendered websites serving up something different to the client versus the server. I have a hat here. What can you do to scrape a dynamic website? Somebody said something here. Huh? Okay, that's pretty good. Sorry, I'm not good at throwing, so watch your face. Okay, please pass that back. Browser automation, somebody said something else here. Huh? How? Tell the site you're a phone by how? Anybody? Oh wait, who said that? I will give you some assorted sizes of t-shirts. Here, I'm going to toss it to you. You pass it. Oh, yeah. User agent for anybody that didn't hear that. Okay? Yeah. So spoofing client attributes, user agent is a really good one. Browser automation over there. I was able to scrape Postman.com by updating user agent to Chrome Lighthouse. Okay? Once you get the content to render, people might not know what you could do under the test tab, but there's a Postman sandbox where you can write JavaScript. And so you can use one of the inbuilt libraries, I think Cheerio, to then extract the HTML elements that you want. And when you're reverse engineering an AP that's not yours, in this case, I was not running Postman.com, what works today might not work next month. Okay? So Chrome Lighthouse works, and it renders data as of yesterday, I checked. But a year ago, I was using Googlebot or Bingbot, right? Postman.com was sending a rendered version of that HTML to get crawled for SEO purposes, right? So that's a perfectly legitimate way to gather data from Postman.com. Okay, so the next scenario was spoofing, pretending to be something you're not. And I didn't show how you can pretend to be a phone, but I mean, there's some really good tutorials. I think the couch surfing one is a pretty decent one, and the Starbucks tutorial is a pretty decent one. Okay. And the last scenario is, how do you replay those calls programmatically, right? You can also send the request from a client like Postman. You can fire off a curl request, but you can also generate a code sample. So on the right, you see an image. If you click the code icon, right now I'm sending it in Node request framework, but you could just replicate that API call to copy and paste into your own bot. That's what I did for Yosemite. I just generated the calls and then pasted them into my little bot. All right, so, our time is coming to an end. So key takeaways. Every example that I shared at the very beginning, the Starbucks, the Papa John's, the couch surfing, and the Tinder, all followed the same beginning. All they did was sniff the traffic. Okay, gaining visibility is half the battle, but it's not the hard part. The hard part comes with replaying it. So when you get stuck, it's not a formula, there's not a checklist. A lot of it's intuition. A lot of it's intuition and putting the pieces together. And we just went through a tiny, tiny little list of scenarios, but it's infinite what the server could be checking and what could make you appear to be something that you're not. And if you were hoping that this was going to be a how-to Postman talk, we covered a teeny tiny sliver of Postman features. So we talked about data formats, proxy, interceptor, code generation, generating those code snippets. But there's a ton of other stuff that I'd be happy to talk to you about. And last Friday, if you believe in releasing on a Friday, last Friday, the Postman engineering team had a monster release. We launched MQTT support, an AI bot, Live Insights, which again gives you more visibility, and a VS Code extension. And so Interceptor has been primarily a Chrome extension for many, many moons. And last Friday, we announced it for all the major browsers. So if you want to come catch me in the hallway, please feel free. Otherwise, I do have Postman stickers, and thank you very much.